Montana Territory, 1883, the wind howled through the Bitterroot Valley when the stagecoach finally creaked to a halt in front of the weathered wooden depot in Hamilton. A baby's sharp wail pierced through the cold air, followed by a hushed voice trying to soothe it. Marshal Hargrove stood near the gate, boots planted in the snow-dusted earth, hat low over his eyes. He saw her before anyone else stepped down, a woman wrapped in a faded blue shawl, clutching a crying baby close to her chest. Her face turned toward him as she descended, and he saw the burned scars that stretched down the left side of her cheek and neck, vanishing beneath her collar. She did not look away. The baby hiccuped, then cried again, red-faced and restless. Marshal stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, you Helena Vance," she nodded. "Yes, and this is my son Zeke." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. Her eyes were sharp, watching him with the kind of quiet strength he had only seen in women who had already survived more than most men ever would. "I'm Marshal Hargrove," he said, offering his hand. "You came a long way." "I did," she said, not shaking his hand, both arms full with the bundled child. "Your letter said you needed a wife. I needed somewhere to start over." He glanced down at the baby, then back at her. "I meant what I wrote. I did not expect a child, but I do not hold it against you." His voice dropped a little. "Or the scars." She looked at him hard, like she was trying to see if he meant it. He did not flinch. He had seen worse, done worse. And still, somehow, here he was, a man with a ranch land and too much silence. The wind picked up again. Helena shifted Zeke in her arms. "He will need milk soon. I have goats. We will get you both warm first." Helena followed him without a word, her boots crunching behind his along the snowy path that led to his wagon. He lifted the trunk that was marked with her name and heaved it into the back, then helped her climb up. She did not ask for help, but she did not refuse it either. The ride to the ranch was quiet except for the baby's soft sounds and the creak of the wagon wheels. Marshal kept glancing over, watching how Helena held Zeke, how she whispered to him in a way that made the child settle. The right side of her face was smooth, pretty even, but her left told a different story, skin marbled with old pain, healed without vanity. She did not hide it. That struck him harder than anything. They reached the ranch by sundown. His house sat low among the pines, smoke curling from the chimney. He lifted Helena down, then the baby, and opened the front door to let the warmth spill out. Inside, everything was clean but plain. She looked around the small cabin. A single bedroom, a hearth with firewood stacked beside it, a worn table with 2 chairs, and a crib in the corner that had not been there 2 weeks ago. "You built that?" she asked, nodding toward the crib. "I did," said Marshal. "Figured I should be ready for anything." Helena walked over and gently laid Zeke down. The baby fussed, then settled with a small sigh. She turned slowly. "You really meant to marry someone you never met?" "I do not say things I do not mean," he said simply. "I need someone who can stand beside me, not behind, not in front. Beside." Her eyes studied him. Marshal stood tall, broad-shouldered, his hands worn from years of ranch work. He was not handsome in the way of city men, but he was solid, honest. She could see that much already. "I did not ask for a man's pity," she said, "and I did not offer any," he replied. "I saw a woman who had lived through fire and still held her head high. You are stronger than me," her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her, not in those words. "I will marry you," Helena said. "But not because I am desperate, because I want a quiet life, safety for him." She glanced at Zeke. "And maybe something more if we earn it." Marshal nodded once. "Then let us earn it." That night she took the bed and he took the floor by the fire. The baby woke twice, and each time she rose without complaint, feeding and rocking him. Marshal watched her from under the edge of his blanket, the way she moved, careful and patient. She never complained, never once sighed in frustration. The next morning, the sun rose over the frozen hills. Helena stood outside with a shawl wrapped tight, Zeke in her arms. Marshal came out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "Thank you," she said, her fingers brushing his as she took it. He nodded toward the barn. "I have a few cattle and 3 horses, goats out back. You mind helping with the feeding today?" "I would rather be useful," she said. They worked side by side, not speaking much, but not uncomfortable either. Helena was quiet, but not cold. She moved like someone used to being overlooked, someone who did not expect kindness. But when he handed her a folded knit blanket from his mother's trunk, she blinked hard and looked away. 2 days passed. Then 5. On the 6th morning, while Marshal was mending a fence, a rider came tearing down the road. Dust flew. The man shouted before he even stopped. Marshal. Trouble at the Miller place. Barn fire. 2 children missing. Marshal dropped the hammer and ran. Helena followed without hesitation. They rode fast, the wind biting, snow melted into mud beneath the horses' hooves. When they reached the Miller farm, smoke still curled from the blackened barn. The mother was sobbing, the father shouting names. Zara, Zane. Marshal jumped from his horse, eyes scanning the tree line. Where were they last seen? In the barn. I thought they came out. Helena did not wait. She handed Zeke to the mother and ran toward the tree line. Her skirt caught on a branch, tearing. She ducked low, eyes searching. A faint cry. She ran toward it. 2 small children, twin siblings, maybe 6 years old, were huddled beneath a log behind the barn, soot-streaked and shaking. Helena crouched beside them. It is all right. I have you, she whispered. She picked Zara up first, then looked to Zane. Can you walk? He nodded, tears on his cheeks. She led them back, one arm holding the girl, the boy clinging to her skirt. Marshal met her halfway, eyes wide. You found them. They were scared, she said, breathless. But alive. He stared at her, something shifting in his chest. You ran into danger without a second thought. She looked up at him, hair loose around her face, streaked with ash. So did you. He took a step closer. Helena. But she turned back to the children kneeling beside them. They need water, blankets. They rode home in silence, but that night, after Zeke was asleep, Helena stood by the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Marshal stepped closer. Every day you prove yourself stronger than I ever imagined. She looked at him. I am not trying to prove anything. I know, he said. That is what makes it true. She looked up into his face, and for the first time she smiled, not politely, not guarded. Real. He did not kiss her, not yet, but he wanted to, and she did not look away. The frost held fast through the first week of March, the morning still hard, edged with cold. Helena rose before the light, her fingers red from the pump water as she scrubbed linens outside the back door. Zeke was wrapped snug on her chest in a sling she'd sewn from old muslin and feed sack cloth, his warmth a comfort despite the ache in her shoulders. Marshal returned from the upper pasture just as the sun cracked over the pines. His coat was dusted with ice, his gloves stiff. He paused when he saw her bent over the wash basin, steam rising from the rinse water. Without a word, he stepped up and took the bucket from her hands. I'll carry it, he said. I've got it. I know you do. They walked to the line strung between 2 cedar posts, quiet but not strained. Helena wrung the cloth tight and pinned it with a wooden clip. Her hands worked methodically, the fabric snapping in the wind as it joined the others. Marshal watched her movements. That sling you made, it holds him snug. She glanced down at Zeke, sleeping against her chest. He settles easier when he can hear my heart, he nodded. My mother used to say that about my youngest sister, said the rhythm reminded him they weren't alone. Helena's eyes lifted. You have sisters. Had only one still living, married a blacksmith in Deer Lodge. We write once a year or so. She worked in silence for a moment, then asked, and your mother? Passed 4 winters back. Pneumonia took her quick. She was strong, though, like you. Helena shifted her grip on the last linen. Her voice was soft but steady. I used to think strength looked like never bending, but sometimes it's knowing when to lean. Marshal looked at her for a long breath. You can lean on me if you ever need to. She didn't answer right away, just pinned the final sheet and stepped back. The wind caught the fabric, lifting it like a sail. Zeke stirred, then settled again. That afternoon, while Marshal saw to the tack in the barn, Helena found her way to the small shelf of books above the hearth. She brushed dust from the spines, fingers pausing over a worn leather-bound volume of Psalms, a seed catalog from 3 years ago, and a thin journal with pages only half filled. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, plain. Notes on weather, calf births, fence repairs. But between the lines, she saw the loneliness entries spaced weeks apart, some pages empty entirely. When Marshal came in, he found her sitting near the fire, Zeke asleep beside her in the cradle. The journal was open in her lap. You wrote about the sky more than the land, she said, not looking up. I watched it more often, he replied, unlacing his boots. I used to do that too. After the fire, when I couldn't sleep. I'd look out the window and wonder if the stars kept track of the ones who went missing. I reckon they do, he said, settling across from her. Or maybe they just wait for us to stop running. Helena closed the journal gently. I wasn't running when I came here, I was walking forward. Even if the ground still burned, Marshal leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Why did you answer my letter, Helena? Truly, she met his eyes. Because I didn't want to raise Zeke among people who looked at him and only saw the man who made him. He didn't press, didn't ask more. Just said, he's got your eyes, that's a good thing. That night, a storm rolled in from the northwest. The wind moaned through the trees, sleet ticking against the windows. Helena rose twice to check the latch on the door, once to make sure the goats were stabled tight. When she came back inside, Marshal was lighting the second lamp, casting a low amber glow across the room. You don't sleep through much, he said. I learned early not to. He handed her a cup of warmed cider. You ever make flapjacks? She blinked at the change of subject. Every Sunday morning before. Why? I'm planning a ride to the mill in a few days. Thought maybe we'd make it a Sunday breakfast first. You and me and Zeke. She cradled the cup between her palms. That sounds right. Marshal shifted his weight, then said carefully, I could use your eye on the seed ledger too. I always overbuy oats and forget barley. Helena looked over the rim of her cup. You're asking me to help run things. I'm asking you to share the work, share the place. If you're willing, she nodded once. I didn't come here to be kept, I came to be part of something. He stood then, slow, and crossed to the window. The sleet had thickened, streaking sideways. He turned back to her. I meant what I said that first day. About standing beside me. Her voice was quiet but sure. I believe you. He gave one slow nod and went to bank the fire. Neither of them said another word that night, but when Helena laid down, she did not keep her shawl on. And when Marshal eased onto the floor, he placed his bedroll a little closer to the hearth, closer to her. Outside, the storm softened. Inside, something else had begun to settle. Not comfort, not yet, but trust, perhaps. The kind that grows in the quiet when no one is watching. By late March, the ground began to thaw in patches, the crust breaking loose underfoot where the sun reached longest. Helena knelt in the garden plot with her sleeves rolled, Zeke bundled in a basket beside her on a quilt. She turned earth with a rusted trowel, nose stinging from the raw scent of thawed soil and last year's decay. Marshal stood a few steps back, watching her line out rows with a string and 2 stakes. You measured that neat, he said. I was raised by a man who wouldn't let a crooked furrow pass, she replied, not pausing. Said the ground gives back what you give it, not more, not less. He crouched near her, his boots pressing into the softening ground. I've always planted by eye. But then again, I was usually too tired to care if the carrots grew straight. She looked over at him, eyes narrowed in the sun. If I do this right, we'll have enough for pickling come fall. You have jars in the cellar. Used to fill them with apples, back when the tree held more than birds. She pushed her trowel into the soil again. I can mend its crown before bloom, might get a small yield this year. Marshal rested his arms on his knees. You know trees too. I know what survives. They worked in tandem for hours, Helena sowing cold crops with a steady hand, Marshal clearing the perimeter fence of winter-fallen branches. By mid-afternoon, Zeke stirred and whimpered. Helena wiped her hands on her apron before lifting him, tucking his head beneath her chin. He's warming to the quiet here, she said, rocking gently. Marshal leaned on the fence, one arm over a post. I've noticed, you too maybe, she hesitated. I never trusted quiet before. Not after the fire, it always came before something bad. He nodded slowly. Here it comes after, that's the difference. A gust of wind scattered the seed sack. He caught it before it flew far, pressing it back into her hand. Thank you, she said. You still jump when the floor creaks. I know. He studied her face, the way her gaze stayed on the horizon. I don't need you to be unscarred, Helena, I just need you here. She adjusted Zeke across her shoulder. I'm not leaving. The next day, a man rode up the trail with a limp in his right leg and a battered hat pulled low. Marshal stepped outside with his rifle resting loose in his arms. Elias Warner, the man said, voice gravel rough. Used to ride east of here. Heard you needed a smith for that broken plowshare. Marshal kept one hand near the trigger. I didn't send for anyone. You didn't, But word travels. I'm not looking for charity, just trade. Helena stepped out behind Marshal, Zeke asleep in her shawl. Elias tipped his hat. Ma'am, she nodded once. What do you want in exchange? Board for a week, and a new sole on my boot if you've got the tools. Marshal considered. I've got the leather. You can sleep in the loft. That evening, Elias fixed the blade with practiced hands while Helena stitched the torn boot sole by lamplight. Marshal watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You work quiet, Helena said to Elias. Talk never sharpened steel, he answered. You two married? Marshal's answer came calm. We are, Elias nodded once. You suit each other. Later, after Elias turned in, Marshal and Helena sat outside near the fence line. The moon hung low and wide, throwing long silver shadows across the prairie. Helena pulled her shawl tight. Zeke's growing, his hands grab now. I saw him latch to your braid this morning, she smiled faintly. He's strong, like his mother. She turned her face toward him. The moonlight touched her scars, softening what daylight could not. I didn't expect to feel safe again, she said. Not like this. You are, he said. With me, you are. Marshal reached out, not sudden, just steady. His hand brushed hers where it rested in her lap. She didn't pull away. Their fingers wove together, slow and sure. Helena exhaled, long and quiet. I could love you, she said. Not today. But it's growing, like the carrots. He squeezed her hand once. I'll wait, he said. And I'll be here when it comes. They sat like that until the air turned sharp again, and the stars began to fade behind the coming dawn. The creek behind the barn ran fuller, fed by meltwater from the hills. Helena stood at its edge one morning, skirts tucked into her boots, collecting smooth stones in a woven basket. Zeke lay swaddled on a quilt nearby, his face turned toward the sky, hands twitching in his sleep. Marshal emerged from the tree line with a brace of grouse slung over one shoulder. His eyes caught on her posture, the way she crouched low, back straight, fingers sifting with care through the current. She didn't hear him until he was near. What are the stones for? She didn't look up. A hearth bowl. I want to grind chamomile and sage into powder. Zeke's gums are starting to ache. He fussed most of the night. Marshal set the birds down on a flat stump. You've an eye for what's useful, even when it's small. I was taught to make do with what's at hand. That doesn't mean I don't want more. She stood, wet hem clinging to her calves, and shook out the basket. There's beauty in what's simple, but not in always scraping by. He stepped beside her, close enough to hear the water between the rocks. You want more than this place. I want this place to grow. I want a yoke-trained team, a full pantry by October, and a roof that doesn't weep in the corner come rain. I want Zeke to have a start that doesn't depend on chance. Marshal's voice was low. Then we'll build it. Nothing says we can't. She gazed up at him, the wind catching strands of her hair, loose from her braid. Have you ever built something with someone else? Only fences, and they never held long. I don't want to live behind fences. He nodded once. Then we'll build something else. That evening, Elias knocked once on the door and stepped back. I'm moving on, he said as Marshal opened it. Your plow's whole, your boots sound, and the sky's clear enough to ride. Helena came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cloth. You're welcome to stay another night. Supper's near ready. Elias shook his head. No sense lingering. You've got your rhythm here. I won't disturb it. Marshal passed him a small sack of wheat flour and a pouch of tobacco. Fair trade for fair work. Elias took it, then glanced toward Helena. You've found a good one. Hold on, Marshal. He left before more could be said, his horse trailing dust down the road. Inside, Helena turned back to the stove. He was kind, wary but kind. He saw steadiness, Marshal said. What do you see? He didn't answer at first. The stew bubbled softly behind her, the room scented with thyme and onion. She stood still, waiting. I see someone who doesn't ask to be carried but who's worth carrying just the same. Her shoulders eased. You don't talk to fill space, do you? No, I like that. After supper, Zeke stirred and cried out, his mouth red and restless. Helena rocked him, humming low, then paused. Could you? Marshal was already moving. He reached for the small spoon she kept on the mantel, dipped it into the cooled chamomile paste she'd made earlier, and handed it to her. She looked at him, surprised. You remembered. I watch. She dabbed the paste along Zeke's gums, and the boy stilled, mouth working slowly. She leaned her cheek to his downy head, then whispered, Every day he grows in this place, it feels less like borrowed time. Marshall crouched beside them, one hand braced on the cradle's edge. Then it's ours now, not borrowed, not owed, ours. Helena's hand found his. She didn't squeeze. She didn't need to. The next morning she rose before the rooster. Steam rose from the cup she left by his side of the table, black coffee, no sugar. She'd ground the beans fine the way he liked. When he came in from the barn, he saw her near the fire with Zeke in her arms, both warm and quiet. "I've been thinking," she said. "Spring fair's in 3 weeks. I could take dried herbs, sewn sachets, maybe trade for a butter churn or seed potatoes." He took his seat, nodding. "I'll bring the cured leather and the saddle blanket I stitched up last fall." She tilted her head. "You do needlework. I do what's needed." They shared a glance, steady and full. No hesitations lingered now, no questions about staying. A wind passed outside, soft and new. Inside, they drank their coffee in silence, the kind that needed no filling. The morning of the spring fair broke clear, sky pale as washed linen. Helena packed the last of her dried bundles into the burlap sack she'd stitched from an old flour bag, her fingers swift and practiced. Zeke kicked beneath the wool blanket in his cradle, cooing softly, arms waving like he knew something special waited beyond the window. Marshall finished hitching the team and stepped into the doorway, brushing dust from his sleeves. Wagons loaded. "You ready?" she nodded, wrapping Zeke against her chest. "If we leave by first bell, we'll reach the valley road before the sun gets too high." He helped her into the wagon bed, careful as always, then handed up the sack of wares. She arranged it beside a wooden crate layered with folded saddle leathers and the hand-woven blanket he'd mended through the winter faded blue, whip-stitched clean at the edges. The road to town cut through open country, greening now with new shoots and patches of wild mustard. Birds dipped low through the air, their calls sharp and bright. Zeke slept through the jostling, his head tucked against her collarbone. "You ever been to the Ravelly Spring Fair?" she asked, watching the land slip past. "Only once. I was 16. Got in a fight with a gambler who tried to cheat my uncle out of a mule. Spent the rest of the day picking gravel out of my knuckles." She raised an eyebrow. "Sounds festive." "I didn't say I was proud of it." Helena smiled, small but real. "Let's aim for a quieter visit." When they reached the fairgrounds, the town had already spilled out onto the packed dirt. Rows of wagons lined the edges, with tarpaulins stretched overhead to shade tables of hand tools, jars of preserves, and bolts of calico. A fiddler played somewhere near the center, the notes rising above the low hum of trading voices. Marshall claimed a corner near the livery, where the breeze carried the scent of fresh hay instead of smoke. Helena laid out her sachets, bundles of dried yarrow, and small pouches of soaproot she'd wrapped in muslin. Marshall placed the blanket at the front, draped neatly, beside 2 bridles he'd tooled with small, careful designs. It didn't take long before the first buyer stopped by. A rancher's wife with a sun-creased face picked up a bundle and sniffed. "Sage and mint, good for colds," Helena nodded. "Steeped or crushed into a poultice, it keeps well through summer." The woman fished a coin from her apron. "I'll take 2. By midday, Marshall had sold the blanket and one of the bridles. Helena's herb stock had thinned by half, and Zeke had drawn coups from 5 different women, one of whom offered to watch him while Helena stepped away to find bread and dried apple slices. When she returned, Marshall was speaking with a man who wore a tin badge from the county line. His voice was low, brow drawn tight. Helena approached with care, eyes narrowing. The man tipped his hat. "Ma'am, just passing news. There's been talk of a small gang riding through the outer homesteads, lifting chickens and tools. Nothing violent, but folks are uneasy." Marshall's jaw set. "They staying east of the river, so far, just wanted your eyes open." The lawman left after a few more words. Helena handed over a piece of bread. "You think they'll come near us? I'll double-check the fence lines. Maybe keep the rifle loaded at night, but I don't think they're after trouble, just hungry." She looked at him then, full and steady. "We have enough to share." "If it comes to that," he gave a short nod. "We do." By late afternoon, the fare began to thin. Marshall loaded their few unsold items into the wagon while Helena wrapped Zeke tighter, tucking him into the crook of her arm. She paused before climbing up, glancing once more over the field. I didn't expect to feel proud standing behind a table like that. Marshall offered his hand. You should, you earned it. She took his hand, but instead of stepping up at once, she lingered. You make it easy to believe in things again. This life, this land, us. He held her gaze. Then let it be real. Let's make it more than a start. She stepped up, not pulling away from his grip. I want that. They rode home in silence, the kind that settled deep and warm. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in gold. Zeke slept without stirring, and the wagon creaked in a rhythm that felt like breath. That night, after the animals were fed and the last of the fair goods tucked away, Helena stood at the basin, wringing out a cloth. Marshall came in from the barn, shoulders loose with the quiet peace that followed good work. I spoke to the circuit preacher today, he said, removing his hat. She turned. What for? He'll be nearby next Sunday. I asked if he'd marry us, properly. Helena folded the cloth over the line. And he said yes. She crossed the room to him, hands slipping into his. Then so do I. They stood there, close and still, until he leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently to hers. You've changed this place, he murmured. She smiled against his chest. And you've changed me. The wedding was small. The preacher stood beneath the twin aspens behind the house, with Marshall's sister and her husband having arrived the day before to stand witness. Helena wore a dress she'd sewn from an old linen sheet, dyed soft green with walnut husks. Zeke gurgled in his aunt's arms, sun-haloed in content. When the vows were spoken, Marshall didn't speak loud, but every word held. Helena's voice didn't falter. They kissed once, slow and sure, and the spring wind caught in the trees like applause. That evening, she placed her apron in the drawer for the last time that day and came to him by the hearth, where Zeke lay sleeping in the cradle. Marshall reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers with his before sinking beside him on the floor. The fire crackled low, casting warm light across their faces. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. This is home now, not just a place, but us. She rested her head against his shoulder. It always was, I just didn't know it yet. Outside, the land settled into dusk. Inside, the warmth lingered, deep and quiet. They stayed that way until the flames dimmed, and the soft rhythm of Zeke's breath joined their own. Years passed, but the shape of their life held true. The garden grew fuller each season. The apple tree bore enough to fill the jars twice over. Zeke took his first steps between their boots, chasing chickens and laughter. And every night when the lamps were blown out and the house fell still, Helena and Marshall lay beside each other in a peace they had built with their own hands. Their love was not loud. It was steady. It was real. And it lasted.